The crystalline halls of Research Station Epsilon 7 had never felt so empty to Naira. Her iridescent scales flickered with anxiety as she made her final checks on the containment protocols. The collective had trusted her, the youngest xenobiologist of her kind, to study humanity's biological responses to deep space. So far, all she had were readings from their primitive satellites and scattered radio signals. Until today. The station's sensors had detected an approaching vessel, unmistakably human in design. Her superior officer had ordered immediate evacuation, leaving Naira alone to collect final data before shutdown. But something had gone wrong with the evacuation protocols. Now she was truly stranded, watching the human ship draw closer through the station's transparent walls. Impossible, she whispered, her inner eyelids flickering rapidly as the vessel executed a perfect docking maneuver. The collective's intelligence suggested humans lacked such precision in zero gravity. Her curved fingers flew across the holographic controls, initiating emergency lockdown procedures. The airlock cycled. Naira's heart thundered in her chest. She should hide, yet curiosity rooted her in place. The inner door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a figure in a sleek white pressure suit. The human removed their helmet, revealing features that made Naira's scientific mind race with observations. Pink-hued skin, dark hair, symmetrical facial structure, male, by their species dimorphism. Well, the human said, brown eyes widening. You're definitely not the maintenance crew I was expecting. Naira straightened to her full height, nearly 7 feet of iridescent grace. This is a restricted research facility. Identify yourself. The human raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. James Barrett, astronaut engineer from Earth Space Agency. We detected power fluctuations from this station. Thought someone might need help. His lips curved upward. I'm guessing you do, since this place looks pretty deserted. I require no assistance, Naira replied stiffly, though her scales betrayed her uncertainty with ripples of color. You should leave immediately. James took a careful step forward. Those power readings suggest otherwise. Your life support systems are failing. I can help. Naira's inner eyelids flickered again. He was right, she'd been so focused on the containment protocols, she'd missed the critical system warnings. You would assist me? Despite our species differences? James shrugged, a gesture Naira found fascinating. Way I see it, anyone stuck alone in space could use a friend. Besides, I've always wanted to meet an alien. Though I've got to say, you're a lot more beautiful than the ones in our movies. Naira's scales flushed deep blue with embarrassment. Your attempt at humor is unnecessary. If you truly wish to help, the primary power core is through there. She gestured toward a corridor with her four-fingered hand. Lead the way, James said, that curious upward curve still on his lips. I'm James, by the way. Since we're going to be working together. As they made their way through the station's winding corridors, Naira found herself studying the human with growing fascination. His movements were efficient despite the low gravity, his questions about the station's systems surprisingly insightful. Perhaps the collective's assessment of humanity needed revision. Here, she said, stopping before a massive door covered in warning symbols. The core chamber. But I must warn you, the radiation levels are beyond what your species can typically tolerate. James was already pulling equipment from his suit's utility belt. Good thing I brought protection then. You might want to step back, this could get interesting. Naira watched in amazement as the human worked, his hands steady even as warning alarms blared around them. He seemed completely unfazed by the danger, focused entirely on the task. When the core finally stabilized, bathing them in steady blue light, she found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about humans. That should do it, James said, wiping his brow. Though I've got to ask, what exactly were you researching here? This station's got some pretty advanced tech for a simple observation post. Naira's scales rippled with unease. She couldn't reveal the true nature of her research, studying humanity's potential as either allies or threats to the collective. Yet something about this human made her want to trust him. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could discuss it over what your people call coffee. I've synthesized some in my laboratory. For research purposes, of course. James grinned, a gesture Naira was beginning to find oddly appealing. Now that's the best first contact proposal I've ever heard. As they made their way to her lab, Naira realized her mission had shifted into something far more intriguing than simple observation. This human was going to change everything, she just didn't know how much yet. The synthesized coffee swirled in James's cup, its aroma filling Naira's lab with an earthy scent that made her sensory membranes tingle. She watched, fascinated, as the human took another sip, his expression one of amused tolerance. Not quite Starbucks, he said, but I appreciate the effort. Now, about this research station. A warning klaxon cut through the air, making both of them jump. Red emergency lights began pulsing along the corridors. That's impossible, Naira muttered, her scales shifting to anxious amber. The core is stable. Unless. Her fingers flew across the nearest console, pulling up system diagnostics. No. Want to share with the class? James set down his cup, already moving to look over her shoulder. The containment fields are failing, Naira explained, her voice tight. All of them. Simultaneously. That shouldn't be possible unless. She stopped, her inner eyelids flickering rapidly. Unless someone wanted them to fail, James finished grimly. Your evacuation wasn't an accident, was it? Naira's scales darkened with shame. No. But I didn't know. I thought. I was told it was a routine security protocol. She turned to face him fully. James, there are things in those containment fields that could destroy both our species if released. Then we better make sure that doesn't happen. He was already checking his suit's systems. What exactly are we dealing with? Before Naira could respond, a deep rumble shook the station. Through the transparent walls, they watched in horror as one of the outer research pods detached itself, spinning away into space. Specimens, Naira whispered. Hybrid cellular structures combining the most resilient aspects of both our species. The collective, some believed humanity's biological adaptability could be weaponized. James's expression hardened, but his voice remained steady. So much for peaceful first contact. How do we stop this? Naira's scales rippled with surprise. You would still help, knowing what we were planning. You're not the one who planned this, James said simply. And right now, you're trying to stop it. That's good enough for me. Besides, he added with a slight smile, can't let the first alien I meet die in a lab explosion. It'd make a terrible story. Another tremor rocked the station. Naira's claws clicked against the console as she pulled up more data. The primary containment chamber is in Research Pod Alpha. If we can reach it, I might be able to initiate emergency purge protocols. Might? The systems were designed to prevent tampering. Even with my clearance, accessing them won't be easy. She hesitated. And the radiation levels are probably the least of our problems right now, James finished. He checked his suit's seals one last time. Lead the way. They raced through the station's twisting corridors, every step accompanied by the groaning of stressed metal and blaring alarms. Naira found herself constantly glancing at James, marveling at how quickly he adapted to the station's artificial gravity fluctuations. The human capacity for equilibrium adjustment is remarkable, she couldn't help noting. Save the scientific observations for later, James called back, though she detected amusement in his voice. How much further? Through here. Naira pressed her palm to a scanner, and a massive door slid open with a hiss of escaping air. But there's something you should know. The words died in her throat as they entered the chamber. Dozens of containment tubes lined the walls, each filled with writhing masses of tissue that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. And in the center. Is that what I think it is? James breathed. A massive cylindrical tank dominated the room, and within it floated a creature that seemed to combine the worst aspects of both their species. Muscled limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, iridescent scales covered densely packed human-like musculature, and its face. Naira couldn't look at it directly. The final stage of the hybridization project, she explained, her voice shaking. But it wasn't supposed to be conscious yet. It wasn't supposed to. The creature's eyes snapped open. Run! James grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the tank's surface began to crack. New plan, how do we blow this whole section? Naira's scientific mind warred briefly with survival instinct before reality won out. The emergency protocols, if I can overload the containment fields. Do it. James was already positioning himself between her and the tank, drawing what looked like a crude weapon from his suit. I'll keep our friend busy. As Naira worked frantically at the control panel, she heard the tank shatter behind her. James's weapon discharged with a sharp crack, followed by an inhuman shriek that made her scales stand on end. Any time now. James called out, his voice strained. Almost, there. Naira slammed her palm onto the final control. Warning lights flashed as the station's computer announced emergency protocols engaged. We have 2 minutes to reach the escape pods. Pretty sure our friend here isn't going to let us just walk out. James backed toward her, his weapon trained on the creature as it advanced, its movements a horrifying blend of predatory grace and raw power. Naira's mind raced. The creature was designed to be perfect, unstoppable. But maybe. The coffee, she blurted out. The synthesized version, it contains compounds toxic to the hybrid cellular structure. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed the container from her lab kit and hurled it at the creature's face. The liquid sizzled on contact, and the hybrid screamed in genuine pain, recoiling just enough. Now. They bolted for the door, sealing it behind them as the station's countdown continued. They ran through corridors that were already beginning to buckle, reaching the escape pod bay with seconds to spare. As their pod launched into space, they watched through the viewport as Research Pod Alpha detonated in a spectacular but contained explosion, taking with it all evidence of the hybridization project. So, James said after a long moment of silence, is this a typical day at work for you? Naira's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a shade that humans might call embarrassed purple. I believe I owe you more than synthesized coffee after this. Dinner would be nice, James agreed with a grin. Though maybe we should deal with the fact that your collective might not be too happy about this first. Naira's expression grew serious. No, they won't be. And there are more research stations out there. She turned to face him fully. James Barrett, I believe I need to tell you everything. Starting with the real reason I was studying humans. I'm all ears, he said, settling back in his seat. Though first, maybe we should call my ship. Pretty sure they're wondering why their maintenance check is taking so long. As they floated in space, waiting for pickup, Naira realized that today had proved one thing definitively: humans were far more adaptable, resilient, and surprising than the collective had ever imagined. And perhaps, she thought as she watched James radio his ship, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The Earth Space Agency's debriefing room felt impossibly small to Naira. Her scales shifted nervously as she watched James pace, his expression darkening with each new detail she revealed about the collective's plans. Let me get this straight, he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. There are 12 more research stations, all conducting similar experiments. And the collective plans to use these hybrids as what, an invasion force? Not exactly. Naira's claws clicked against the metal table. The collective fears humanity's potential. Your species adapts too quickly, evolves too readily. The hybrids were meant to be a countermeasure, a way to control your development. By releasing monsters that combine the worst of both our species. James stopped pacing to look at her directly. That's not control, Naira. That's genocide. Before she could respond, the room's door slid open. Director Harrison, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, entered with a tablet in hand. We've confirmed your story, Miss Naira. Our deep space sensors have detected energy signatures matching the destroyed research station near Jupiter's outer moons. Then you understand the urgency, Naira said, rising to her full height. The collective will know something went wrong by now. They'll accelerate their plans. Which is why we're sending you both in, Harrison announced, sliding the tablet across the table. Our scientists have analyzed the data you provided. We think we can locate the other stations using their energy signatures. But we need someone who knows their systems. James picked up the tablet, his eyebrows rising as he read. This is a Black Ops mission. Off the books. Officially, you're conducting routine maintenance checks on our outer solar system beacons. Harrison's expression was grim. Unofficially, you're our only hope of stopping this before it becomes an interstellar war. Naira's scales rippled with concern. The collective will brand me a traitor for this. You already are, James said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. The moment you helped me destroy that station, you chose your side. His touch was warm, steadying. Question is, do you regret it? Naira thought about everything she'd seen, the collective's fear-driven plans, humanity's surprising capacity for acceptance, James's unwavering trust despite learning the truth about her mission. No, she said firmly. I don't regret it. Good, Harrison interjected, because you leave in 6 hours. We've modified one of our stealth vessels to accommodate your biological needs, Miss Naira. And James? She fixed him with a stern look. Try not to blow up more than necessary this time. As they prepared for the mission, Naira observed James checking their equipment with methodical precision. His movements were efficient, focused, yet she sensed an underlying tension. You're worried, she stated. 12 stations, each potentially housing monsters that want to eat us. Yeah, I'm a little worried. He paused, looking up at her. But not about working with you. Strange as it sounds, you're probably the only alien I trust right now. Naira's scales flushed with warmth. The feeling is mutual. Though I must warn you, the other stations will be better defended. What we encountered before was merely a prototype facility. Of course it was, James muttered, checking his modified pulse rifle. Any other cheerful news? The station commanders are from a warrior caste, Naira continued. They won't evacuate like my supervisors did. They'll fight to protect their work. And they'll see me as something worse than a traitor. What could be worse than a traitor? A truth teller. Naira's inner eyelids flickered with remembered pain. The collective maintains power through carefully controlled information. By revealing their plans to humanity, I've broken their highest law. James was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. When this is over, he finally said, you'll need somewhere to go. Earth would welcome you. The offer stunned her. Your people would accept me. After learning what my kind planned. You're not your kind. You're you. He smiled, that now familiar expression that made her scales tingle. Besides, we could use a xenobiologist who actually knows what she's talking about. Our scientists are still arguing over whether your scales are decorative or functional. They're both, actually, Naira found herself saying. The iridescence serves as emotional indication, but the patterns can also. She stopped, noting his amused expression. You're teasing me. Only a little. His expression grew serious. We're about to dive into something crazy, Naira. Probably suicidal. If you want to back out. No. She straightened, her scales shifting to a determined blue-green. The collective needs to learn that control through fear only breeds more fear. Perhaps by working together, we can show them a better way. And if we can't, then at least we'll give them something new to fear. She bared her teeth in what she hoped was a passable imitation of a human smile. After all, they've never faced a human alien team before. James laughed, the sound easing some of the tension in the room. Now that's the kind of scientific observation I like. He checked his watch. 2 hours until launch. Want to grab some real coffee this time? As they walked through the Earth Space Agency's corridors, Naira felt a strange sense of peace despite the danger ahead. She had chosen her path, chosen to trust in humanity's capacity for acceptance over the collective's fear of difference. Looking at James, she knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever waited for them in those other stations, they would face it together. And perhaps, in doing so, they would forge something the collective had never anticipated, a bridge between their species built on trust rather than terror. The stealth vessel sliced silently through space, its advanced cloaking systems masking their approach to Research Station Beta 3. Naira's claws tapped nervously against the navigation console as they drew closer to the massive structure hidden in Saturn's rings. "That's bigger than our last party," James remarked, studying the holographic display. The station sprawled before them like a metal spider, its research pods extending on long arms from a central hub. Beta 3 is their primary weapons development facility, Naira explained, her scales darkening with concern. The hybrid experiments were just one aspect. They've been studying every possible way to counter human technological advancement. James checked his modified pulse rifle one last time. "Good thing we brought party favors then. You're sure about the access codes?" "They change daily, but I know the algorithm." Naira's fingers flew across the console, performing calculations. "We'll have a 3-minute window during shift change. Any longer and they'll detect the security breach. 3 minutes to dock, infiltrate, and not die." James grinned. Just another Tuesday. As they maneuvered toward the station's auxiliary airlock, Naira found herself studying her human partner. 2 weeks of working together had taught her that his humor often masked deeper concerns. "You're worried about Harrison's orders? To collect intel and destroy the facility?" "No." He adjusted his tactical suit's settings. "The avoid detection at all costs part? Maybe. The collective needs to know humans aren't as defenseless as they think. Knowledge isn't always power, James." Naira's scales rippled with memory. "Sometimes it's just an excuse for greater violence." Before he could respond, the ship's proximity alerts chimed. They'd reached their entry point. Naira input the access codes with practiced precision, her inner eyelids flickering as she counted down the seconds. Now. They moved with practiced coordination, their previous mission having forged an almost instinctive understanding. James took point as they entered the station, his movements silent despite his tactical gear. Naira followed, her natural ability to sense heat signatures guiding them away from patrolling guards. The station's interior was a maze of laboratories and testing chambers. Through observation windows, they glimpsed projects that made even Naira's scientific mind recoil, weapons designed to target specific human genetic markers, viruses engineered to rewrite DNA, devices meant to manipulate Earth's very atmosphere. "Your people really don't like us, do they?" James whispered as they ducked into a shadow to avoid a passing researcher. "Fear breeds hatred," Naira replied softly. "And humans terrify them. Your species survived disasters that would have ended most civilizations. You adapt, overcome, grow stronger. The collective sees that as a threat to galactic stability. Pretty sure turning us into hybrid monsters isn't great for stability either." James checked his wrist computer. 2 levels down to the central database. Naira nodded, but something was nagging at her senses. The heat signatures ahead were too organized, too concentrated. "James, wait dash." The lights suddenly blazed to full intensity. Armored figures materialized from hidden alcoves, weapons trained on them. And from a side door stepped a towering figure that made Naira's scales pale to almost white. "Sister," Commander ZYX said, his own scales shifting to aggressive crimson. "The collective said you might try something foolish, but bringing a human here?" He clicked his teeth in disapproval. "That's beyond foolish. That's treasonous." "The only treason," Naira replied, straightening to her full height, "is betraying the principles of scientific ethics. What you're doing here isn't research, it's genocide. It's survival." ZYX roared. "While you studied them from afar, I've seen what humans can do. Their potential for violence, for destruction dash. For change," Naira cut in. "For growth. For accepting those who are different." She felt James shift slightly beside her, positioning himself for action. "You fear them because they represent everything the collective can't control." ZYX's scales rippled with rage. "Enough. You've been corrupted by human sentiment. Guards, eliminate the human. Take my sister alive, she'll serve as an excellent test subject." Several things happened at once. James threw something small and cylindrical that erupted in blinding light. Naira, anticipating this, had already closed her inner eyelids and moved. Her claws found the nearest guard's weapon, tearing it away as James's pulse rifle cracked with precise shots. "A little help with the door," James called out, laying down suppressing fire as more guards poured in. Naira reached the control panel, her claws flying across the interface. "Working on it. But ZYX will have triggered station-wide alerts by now." Then we moved to Plan B. We had a Plan B. James's grin was visible even through his tactical mask. "Make it up as we go." He tossed her something, a small data drive. "Get to the central database. Download everything. I'll keep them busy." "James, no. There are too many dash. Trust me." His voice softened. "I'm not as fragile as your people think." Before she could argue, he was moving, drawing the guard's fire with a display of acrobatics that seemed to defy physics. Naira hesitated for a split second, then turned and ran toward the database center. Behind her, she heard James shouting taunts in mangled collective language, phrases she was quite sure she'd never taught him. The database center was surprisingly unguarded, everyone apparently drawn to the firefight. Naira's claws clicked rapidly across the controls, initiating the download while simultaneously planting the virus they'd brought. The collective's arrogance would be their downfall. They'd never expected one of their own to turn against them, never updated their cyber defenses against insider threats. A massive explosion rocked the station. Naira's scales rippled with worry as she watched the download progress. Come on. Your human is quite resourceful," ZYX's voice came from behind her. "He's managed to destroy half our containment labs already. But then, that's what humans do best, isn't it? Destroy things." Naira turned slowly, noting the weapon trained on her. "You've spent so long studying human capacity for violence that you've missed everything else. Their capacity for compassion, for forgiveness, for love dash." "Love?" ZYX spat the word like poison. "You've fallen in love with one of them? You're even more corrupted than I thought." The download completed with a soft chime. Naira's scales shifted to a color she'd never displayed before, one that combined the pale blue of fear with the deep red of rage. "No, brother. I've simply learned to see clearly." She moved faster than ZYX expected, her years of research giving her insights into fighting styles he'd never bothered to study. The weapon went flying as they crashed together, claws raking against scales. ZYX was stronger, but Naira was faster, more adaptable, more human in her tactics. Another explosion, closer this time. Through the observation window, Naira glimpsed James leading a group of guards on a merry chase through the laboratories, somehow managing to trigger every emergency containment protocol in his path. Your precious human will die here, ZYX snarled, pinning her against a console. And you'll live knowing you helped him fail. Naira smiled, showing all her teeth. Actually, she said, he's right on schedule. The station's lights flickered as James's planted charges detonated in sequence. Emergency sirens blared as containment fields began to fail in a cascading pattern. ZYX's eyes widened as he realized what they'd done. You'll kill us all. No, Naira said, shoving him away. I've learned another human trait, knowing when to run. She snatched the data drive and ran, leaving her brother to deal with the chaos they'd unleashed. The rendezvous point was just ahead, and there was James, looking somewhat singed but very much alive. Got it? He asked as they ran for their ship. Got it. Though your distraction was a bit more dramatic than planned. Had to give them something to remember us by. They reached the airlock just as another series of explosions began. Think they'll get the message? Naira watched through the viewport as Research Station Beta 3 began to tear itself apart, its own weapons and containment systems turned against it. If they don't, we have 11 more chances to make our point. As their ship sped away from the destruction, Naira felt James's hand slip into hers. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she was learning to read, pride mixed with concern. You okay? That stuff your brother said. He's wrong about humans, she said firmly. And he's wrong about me. Her scales shifted to a new color, one she'd only recently discovered she could make, the deep, warm gold of certainty. Besides, she added with a small smile, I'm starting to think being corrupted by human sentiment isn't such a bad thing. James laughed, pulling her closer. Careful. Keep talking like that and I might have to corrupt you some more. As they set course for their next target, Naira realized that perhaps the collective had been right about one thing: humans were dangerous. Not because of their capacity for violence, but because of their ability to make you question everything you thought you knew about the universe. And that, she decided, was exactly what the galaxy needed.